We have a first lecture. The title of the lecture is Vector-Based Formulations of the Finite Element Method in Computational Electromagnetics, and it will be delivered by Professor Uday Kankhoje from IIT Delhi. I'll introduce him very briefly. Professor Kankhoje is an assistant professor of electrical engineering at the IIT Delhi, India since 2013. He received a BTech degree from IIT Bombay in 2005 and MS and PhD degree from California Institute of Technology, Pasadena, USA in 2010. All these were in electrical engineering. He was a Caltech postdoc scholar at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, NASA Caltech from 2011 to 2012, and a postdoctoral research associate in the Department of Electrical Engineering at the University of Southern California, Los Angeles, USA, from 2012 to 2013. He is a recipient of the Atwood Fellowship for Graduate Studies at Caltech from 2005 to 6, and the Inspire Faculty Member Fellowship from DST, Government of India, from 2013 to 2018. So I request Professor Kankhoje to deliver the talk.
One thing, Pali, he has not written, which was told to me by Professor Shevgaonkar yesterday, that recently he has been awarded Best Teacher Award by IIT Delhi. So we look forward to his...
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone, and first of all, I'd like to thank Professor Kulkarni for inviting me here. It's very nice to be back on campus after almost 10 years. 2005 I graduated, and here I am. So it's hard to give an exciting talk after the previous lecture, right? It was colorful, no math, and very useful to our lives. This tutorial will almost be the complete opposite of that. It will be black and white. There will be math, and it might be useful to some of you. Okay, so I'll primarily be using the blackboard with very, very little stuff on the screen over here. My intention is to talk about the finite element method. We have seen already in the morning session some examples of node-based formulations, which are very popular for the simple reason that they are very simple to implement. They are known to have some serious issues. You might have heard the expression spurious solutions, internal resonances. All of these things, they are numerical artifacts which spoil our solution. So that was the main motivation to come up with vector-based FEM. Okay. So I wanted to share a general philosophy which I will be following in this tutorial, as well as something that I follow in research. So this Professor Amnon Yariv, he's a very famous physicist at Caltech, and he taught me several courses. So he would begin his courses with this instruction. He was a major in the Israeli army in the 50s, and his artillery instructor is to tell him this, that if it is useful, carry it with you. If it is beautiful, wear it around your neck. If it is of no use, throw it. And this philosophy, I feel we should also use when we approach research. We can be cluttered with tens and thousands of different simulation diagrams and figures and parameters and so on. Throw them all away, start from the basics, and you can work your way through. Okay. So since this is going to be about finite element method, very similar to the way how we begin most functions with invoking Ganesh, here we must invoke Maxwell, right? So that is going to be the starting point. So to this audience, of course, I don't have to motivate this. So the entire FEM formulation that I'll show you will start from these two equations and these two equations alone. So this is the physics part. There's going to be some math. We need to know some vector calculus. Okay. A little bit of engineering to design what kind of basis function we want. So it's an interplay between physics, math, and engineering. Okay, that's going to be the philosophy over here. Now, many speakers before me have spoken about low frequency applications. Here, the formulation which I'm going to show is very general. I'm not making any approximations. The kind of solution that I will assume is a sinusoidal signal. Okay, this is common, so I will say that either E or B has a time dependence of the form j omega t. So that helps me to simplify these derivatives. Okay, so this then becomes and B is mu h. Okay, and the next one becomes okay, where all of these guys are now functions of space. So this should be E, since I've already put this. Okay, so this is a very simple example of a geometry that we are going to be interested in. I'm going to work in 2 dimensions to keep the math little under control. So this is a 2-dimensional boundary. Outermost boundary is this given by the curve gamma, capital gamma, and inside this is my problem of interest. This could be a PCB chip which is radiating some power. This could be a dielectric object which is on which a radar wave is falling. It could be anything. And so this colored part here shows an object of interest. The beauty of FEM, which we all know, is that I can model any arbitrarily shaped geometry. I am not confined to be on a Cartesian grid or whatever, right? The outward normal over here I am denoting by n hat, right? So what can we do with this next? What we'll start with is we want to have an equation in one variable. Right now this is a set of coupled differential equations. E is relating to H and B is relating to E. So simple thing to do next would be, let's take the curl of one of these expressions. So if I take, let's say, if I take this mu in the denominator here or epsilon in the denominator here. Okay, so let me try that. So I have my curl of H over here. Now the main point about FEM is that epsilon and mu are going to be functions of space, right? That's the whole point. So here they look like constants, but these are actually functions of space. So now if I take the curl of this expression over here, I'm in trouble because I'll have to compute the curl of epsilon times E, which I don't know. So what should I do? Simple enough is, let me take this guy into the denominator here. Okay, if I take epsilon r in the denominator here and then I take a curl on both sides, I will have curl of E on the right hand side, which I know how to deal with, right? So that way I can eliminate one variable. So let me show that to you over here. So I have taken this epsilon r here in the denominator on the left hand side. Now I am going to take the curl on the left hand side. So I should get the net result will be curl of E over here with some constants. Curl of E I know is related to proportional to H. So I should have an equation in just one variable, correct? So I will be left with my k0 squared has all my constants of mu naught and epsilon naught, right? So now this is something good. When starting in the original formulation, I had E and H. I had a time derivative. I made the first simplification of a sinusoidal field. Then I reduced it from 2 variables to 1 variable, right? So now we all know we can always express our solution in terms of 2 orthogonal polarizations. I can either talk about a transverse electric polarization or a transverse magnetic polarization. And any final solution can be written as a superposition of both of these, correct? So to make life simple, let's stick to one polarization. Second polarization has the exact same physics. I don't have to do it again once I've understood one. So for this purpose, I'll stick with transverse magnetic. So why is it transverse magnetic? Because if let's say Z vector is coming out of the board over here, the magnetic field is in the direction transverse to Z. So that means H is in the field, in the plane. So this over here, this R over here, R is a vector in XY, which is my 2-dimensional problem domain. Okay. So now let's proceed towards the full formulation of this. Right. So on the screen, I have a simple equation. What does it look like? All I did in this expression is this term over here, I just moved it to the left hand side, correct? So this fh of r, another way of writing my Maxwell's equation is, what would it be? What would this Maxwell's equation be written in terms of fh? Equal to 0, correct? This is just another way of writing our Maxwell's equations. Now in the sort of geometry that I have described over here, where epsilon is a function of time, is a function of space, I know that there are no analytical solutions for this. And that's the whole point of doing this FEM, because I don't have analytical solutions. So, can I solve this equation exactly? Answer is no, we cannot solve it exactly. So, we then say, okay, I can't solve this difficult problem, let me try to solve a slightly simpler problem. And what would that simpler problem be? So that is what is called the weak formulation of FEM. I will say that this is difficult. Instead, let me choose some function, let me call it t, vector function, this is also a vector function. I will say that, I'll make a claim first and then I'll talk about it. I will say that this problem is hard for me to solve. Instead, let me solve a simpler problem, that I'll choose some function t, can be anything right now, that its dot product with this function should be 0 over the computational domain. So this is obviously a weaker problem. I mean, it's a weaker form of the solution of what I want. So if I ask you, so let's stare at this for a while. If I say that if I want to solve Maxwell's equations exactly, what does that correspond to? Choosing t to be Dirac delta functions of space. So if let's say I want to solve it at 5 points, my t is a Dirac delta function centered at 5 points, because it will exactly pull out f of h at those points and impose it equal to 0. So that is the exact thing. So if t was, like I said, like a delta function focused over here, I know that I will recover the exact physics. But now I say that this is difficult, so let me try to, instead of t being a delta function over here, I'll say, okay, let me make it a function that is localized in space. So instead of a delta over here, which is the exact, let me make it into some function that is like a blob, that is slightly defocused. So I'm going away from the exact towards the slightly inexact, and maybe this will be an easier problem to solve. So this is the general philosophy of going from the exact but difficult problem to the inexact but solvable problem. Okay. So far I have not told you anything about what t should be. T is right now entirely in our hands, because now we are slowly boiling it from an exact problem to an engineering problem, and engineering means that design is in my hand. I can choose t. The only objective of choosing t is to make my life simpler. That's all. Okay. So let me expand this over here. So what I'll get is t and this whole nasty thing over here. So far I have not done anything great. I took my exact operator f and I just took its dot product with t over here. So now we are making small steps towards implementation. Now this looks like a ugly expression, right? This does not look like anything that we can deal with. So we have used up our physics equations. So now we'll use two very simple concepts from vector calculus, namely, everyone knows this formula for a scalar triple product, A dot del cross B. You just simply have two terms. This everyone has probably looked at in 11th class. The second result is something that we all looked at in 12th class, that the divergence of a function is equal to the outward surface flux of that function. Correct? So just based on these two simplifications, I can convert this ugly expression into something that can be used. Okay. So Why do I need the first one over here? Because I have something exactly like this over here. So my T is A, del cross, and B is this guy over here. So this term I can simplify using the first equation over here. Okay. Then what is left? It's not by itself, right? It's sitting inside an integral sign, an area integral. So that integral is over the entire computational domain, right? So that's where for the second term on the right hand side over here, I can use this because it's del dot something, whatever it is. So this is del dot something, whatever it is. I can use these two equations to make my life simpler, right? So I'll write down the final expression that you get over here. You can just, it's just one line of algebra from here. This second term will be as is because we are not doing anything to it. So am I missing something right now? I am missing one term, right? Because this first expression here gave me two terms. This is the first term over here because this is my B. So this is B dot del cross A. So my T was my A in this expression over here. So I've got the first term. The next term is going to be coming from the second term there. So del dot something, and what was that something? This whole thing over here. So I will get a line integral, right? This is reducing the dimension of the integral from 2 dimensions to 1 dimension, right? So the term that I have missed over here is going to be an area integral, a line integral. Right? I started with one term and I've got 3 terms now. 1, 2 and 3. So by the way, if you have any questions, stop me right now. Don't wait for the end. Yeah.
The A cross B term must be T cross the entire bracket term, right?
The A cross B term should be?
You have small assumption there to make.
You mean this second term over here?
Yeah.
No, the second term is T cross that ugly thing.
Yeah.
Then I apply this to that. Right? Okay. So the second term gets applied, so it's del dot something. So what you're asking is this whole term over here.
Okay.
Right? So this is my F according to this. That's what I've done over here. Right? Okay, so we have made a few more steps. We have used up Maxwell's equations. We have used up our vector calculus. I don't think we need much more than that. Now, is this, it looks a little bit more expanded, but is this usable still? And the answer to that is going to be a big no, because no problem in electromagnetics can be solved unless I specify a boundary condition. So far I have not spoken about boundary condition, right? So if I, let's say the unknown of interest over here is the magnetic field, it's appearing on the left hand side, it's appearing on the right hand side, there's no way out right now, right? So this brings us to the next case of, okay, now we want to actually solve it. So what kind of boundary condition can we use? Okay, so now this topic of boundary conditions is something for which you can devote entire semesters to discussing. So we'll consider the simplest kind of boundary condition. So the boundary condition that we'll talk about is what is called a first order absorbing boundary condition. People in the literature call it a radiation boundary condition or a Sommerfeld radiation condition. Goes by different names. The basic idea is this, that in this computational domain over here that we are simulating, let's say that there's an EM wave that's falling on this object. It's going to send back some scattered field. Now we want this scattered field to not be reflected by this artificial boundary. At the end of the day, this box that we have drawn around it is not physical. We have a constraint that we have only so much memory and so much hard disk. That's why we have to terminate the computational boundary somewhere. So this outside boundary is an unphysical mathematical construct. Whatever waves that I have that are going out from this should not be reflected back. If they get reflected back, I'm solving an unphysical problem. So the objective of the boundary condition is that whatever field is coming from here, we just peacefully allow it to go out. That is the philosophy of a boundary condition. You can solve this boundary condition I mean, impose this boundary condition, as previous speakers have said, there are various ones, Dirichlet, Neumann, Robin, and so on. Okay. So the simplest first order absorbing boundary condition will be such that, let's say I have a plane interface, let's say I have an interface here. This is how you construct the boundary condition. Let's say I have a wave going like this. Okay. Now, if this is a interface over here, I will expect some reflection and some transmittance, obviously. So the way you design this first order absorbing boundary condition is that for normal incidence on this interface, you derive the condition that R is equal to 0. That's all. And you use this condition for waves that are falling at any angle. So obviously it's not exact. This R is equal to 0, we will create this condition only for a wave that is falling normally. So you can ask, now what if a wave comes at 30 degrees? Answer is that it will get reflected, right? We cannot design something that will not have any reflection using such a simple scheme. But this is good enough to give you a approximate solution, and it's used quite often in the literature. And most importantly, for a tutorial talk, it's the simplest to conceptually show how do you derive it. Okay. So we'll just take one small step back. When we looked at Maxwell's equations, what was the first solution that everyone studied? Plane wave, right? So the solution to this, we said, okay, something like e to the j of omega t minus k dot r. We all know that this is a solution to Maxwell's equations, right? And so just now the boundary condition relation that I said was that we study an incident wave like this, and we want R is equal to 0. So this is the simplest way of an incident wave is a plane wave. Now, this little bit of algebra everyone can do, that because the the k vector is coming like this over here, if I take a space derivative of this expression, what will happen is that I'll get a minus jk outside. The exponential will remain as it is. So I can write this as, for a plane wave, so this del I can replace by minus jk, and the rest will remain the same. And this will remain like this. Similarly, on this expression I can do the same thing. So I'll get a minus jk cross E is equal to minus j omega mu h. So now I have an expression for k cross h. So is this okay with everyone? You can verify this yourself. Just plug this equation into this. So the only action of this guy has things like del by del x and so on, right? So anytime it encounters a space coordinate, it's going to just come out as a constant. So this can be replaced by minus j. That's how I get this minus j. That's all there is to it. Now you can see I have a k cross h and I have a e. I have a k cross e and a h. So like we did earlier, if I take k cross on either of these sides, I can get back an equation in one variable, right? So if I write that, I will get So I use these two equations. What I did is that I converted this into a unit vector, right? The value of k, then the magnitude of that I absorbed into this k naught over here. So I took a k cross h over here. I brought this epsilon down because it's a constant for a plane wave, and I'm left with this expression over here. So what is ZR is the relative impedance of free space. So it should be something like mu by epsilon, mu r by epsilon. Okay, so far I haven't done anything great. This is going to be true for any wave that's going at any direction so far, right? I've just taken a cross product with k. So what is the boundary condition that everyone talks about? So boundary condition, all we have to do is replace the direction of propagation. Here it is some k vector that is going in any direction. I will say that this is going to be true when k hat is equal to n hat. That means, let's say for example over here, when the wave comes this way, k and n, when k and n coincide, I have a exact relation. The wave will not get reflected. The wave will get reflected. So that is the approximation over here, that here now I replace this. So this is a this is the simplest way of looking at a first order absorbing boundary condition. And it's important to note that this will give you zero reflection at only one angle. At all other angles, your code, your formulation is not exact, it's going to give you some reflection. Now, in the way that I have derived this, it's clear to you that this is going to be applicable only for waves that are traveling away from this object, right? Now, if I ask you in this problem, let's say for concreteness, let's assume that there is a radar somewhere here, which is sending a EM wave onto this, right? Now, is the field over here, is it only the scattered field? No, right? There is also the incident field. The total field is composed of the incident field and the scattered field. But this boundary condition that I have derived from physical principles, this intuitively we know this should be only imposed on the scattered field, because the incident field can go any which direction. It's the input to the problem. I don't have to impose any condition on it. I know it, right? So I have to take care that I impose this condition not on the total field, but only on the scattered field. All right. So in other words, what we should do is it should only be applied to the scattered field, right? And how do I write the scattered field? So now in this expression, what I was going to do is replace the k by n, and here is h. So according to this over here, I should only have scattered field over here, correct? But what is my variable in the problem so far? It's h, not hs, right? So I will write this then as minus jk 0 zr times, then I have a n cross h minus hi. Okay, so this is all that I am saying is that this condition should be only applied on the scattered field. So let's reevaluate what we have been doing so far, right? We used our Green's theorem, or sorry, the divergence theorem to give us a contour integral on the right hand side, right? That seems to be a good place for us to impose the boundary condition. Boundary because it's a contour integral, so it's only being imposed on the outside boundary. And like I showed you over here, I should only apply this to the scattered field. So what should I do? On the right hand side, where I had a contour integral, so the right hand side term, I should write something like this. So I had h was the variable on the right hand side. We saw that I had h on the left hand side and h on the right hand side, and we concluded it was not useful. So on the right hand side, what we'll do, we'll split the h in this way. I just add and subtract the incident field. There's nothing great to it. But the good thing is, this term is known, right? This is given to you in the problem. The radar angle at which it is falling on the object is known to me. Hi is well known. H minus hi contains an unknown h. But what I'm going to do is, I'm going to replace it by a simpler expression. Instead of having this curl of hs, I will just simply have a vector cross product, n cross this guy over here. Okay, so now we'll put this together, and the net resulting equation I'm going to write over here. So remember, there was a curl of t dot curl of h, right? This was the first term that was there. Then I had a T dot H. The whole thing was a area integral. Right. Now notice this HI over here, I should leave it on the right hand side, and from this term H minus HI which is coming over here, if you look, H minus HI will also remain over here. So what I should do is I should bring the variables to the left hand side, correct? Because I want to, I'm working towards a matrix formula equation which has the unknowns on the left and knowns on the right. So in this expression, the unknown is H. So let me bring it on the left hand side. So what will happen is I'll have equal to. So now I should be left with known terms on the right hand side. So the known terms are of course coming from the incident field. Correct? So the known terms will be right. So this n cross h I pulled out from here. I will have a hi term over here. So now what we have done is we have converted just by using, there's only two concepts, only the first two Maxwell's equations, only two concepts of vector calculus. Little bit of algebra, moving things around here, no new concept. What we have managed to do is we've got a left hand side which consists entirely of unknowns h, and the right hand side which consists entirely of known things, which is hi is known. So I can calculate the curl of the magnetic field easily. It may be a little algebraically tedious, but I can do this term. This is n cross hi, this also I can do. So now you can see I have brought it to a place where I can think of the matrix equation that will come from here. Okay. So here is the part where we will have to look at a little bit of engineering. How do I proceed next? What sort of basis functions should I use for h or t? So far I have not told you anything about t also, so many things are not known right now. So this brings us to the next part of it. So the next part is about implementation. So instead of doing it the hard way, I'll show it to you in the easy way. What we'll do is this magnetic field over here, which is the unknown of interest, I will say let me expand it along some basis. Okay, so let me say that this is going to be un is some constant. Okay, this is standard. I am expanding my unknown h along some basis which I am calling with the same letter t. And now what has happened, instead of calculating h, now I need to compute these guys. This is known. So this is what is called as Galerkin's method, when I expand the function along the same basis as that as with which I am testing. So that's why this Tn over here. Okay. Now this Tn is where the engineering comes. How do I choose this Tn such that my life becomes simplest? So this is a graphical demonstration of what these edge element functions, as they are called, they look like. So what I'm going to do is that in each triangle, I will try to construct three basis functions. It's a first order basis, so each edge has one basis function associated with it for an element. And so these are my three basis functions, u1, u2, u3, that's the notation for it. So this is 1, 2 and 3. So what are some of the properties of these edge functions? By looking at this, we can infer some of the things. For example, u1 along the other two edges is perfectly normal, right? So u1, for example, along 2 is going to be like this, along 3 is going to be like this. So this is one very useful property. It has no tangential component along other edges. The next property is that along itself, that means along this, you can try to see this. If you look at the component of this u1 vector along this edge, it's going to be constant. So this is one of the properties of this basis function. So normal component is 0 on the other edge, that's the first property. And the second property is that tangential component is constant. So now you might ask, how can I construct this magical function that gives us these properties, right? So this is something that I think the likes of Whitney is one of the first guys who came up with this using traditional Legendre polynomials. He came up with a very simple scheme to give you a basis function which has this property. Now how do we construct this? Again, the scheme is very, very simple. Let's say this is a triangle IJK and some point P inside over here. Okay, so he says that, let me define an area function like this. Li is simply defined as the area of this triangle divided by the total area, right? So this is triangle of PJK divided by triangle of IJK. Okay, now area of IJK and this point P has coordinates xy, right? So now this is going to be obviously a scalar function, right? So L of this is going to be L of xy. It's going to also be a, will it be quadratic, exponential, linear, constant? How will it depend on x and y? Your simple expression from 10th standard geometry for the area of a triangle, if you write it down, right? So we had, if you refresh your memory, right? So it was something xj yk minus xk yj minus xi yk minus yj plus yi xk minus xj. And this was the area of a determinant. Hopefully we remember area of a determinant. So it depended, let's say that my point P over here, so is like the ith coordinate over here, correct? So this was area of triangle IJK. So xi is appearing here by itself, yi is appearing here by itself. So forget the constants, it's a linear function, right? So L of I is going to be a linear function, linearly depending on x, linearly depending on y, and maybe some constant, correct? So this will take a form like this. I'll not go into writing out all the constants, they are very easy to derive. Okay, so I've defined this scalar function. This is a scalar function, right? When x and y becomes I get this L should be 1, obviously. So we are almost there. All we have to do now is, I'll show you how to construct this T.
This is one type of edge element.
This is one type of edge element that is most natural and popular in electromagnetics for the simple reason that you are able to impose tangential boundary conditions for free. Okay, so in fluid dynamics they actually construct slightly different edge elements where the normal component is conserved but the tangential component is not. So depending on the problem you have to choose the edge element appropriately, right? So once I have L over here in my hand, it's very simple to construct this T. So T is simply given by so Lk is the length edge. Okay, now this is gradient of a linear function, so this is going to be a vector times this. Again, gradient of a scalar function is going to be a vector. Again, we will expect this to be linear in x and y. right? So that's all there is to it. So this is, if I write it out in terms of the vector components, comes out in, this is sort of simple algebra that school student can do. So you get your basis function here, the x component depends only on y and the y component depends only on x. And I mean, it's very hard to imagine, right, that you did all this algebra and you got such a beautiful set of functions, but that's all there is behind these. So this is an example of a first order basis function. People have created higher order basis functions. It just gives you more accuracy and you can make your grid size larger. That is the main advantage of it. Okay. So another property of this is that this function is non-zero only inside the triangle. So if I ask you what is the value of this vector function at this point, the answer is 0. Similarly for these guys. So remember in the very beginning we had said that when t was a delta function, we recovered our Maxwell's equation. Then we said, oh, that problem is very difficult to solve, so let me make t to be a little bit of a glob, like slightly is more spread out. So now this is an example of t which is slightly more spread out. So what I will do is I will choose this to be my testing function t as well as my basis function to expand. Okay. So within each triangle, let's say this is, I have something like this over here. So within each triangle, all I have to do is write out the field over here. So let's say I'm interested in the magnetic field over here. H will simply be U1 T1 plus U2 T2 plus U3 T3. That's the simplicity that I've got. Because, so for example, if this was 1, 2 and 3 and this is 4 and 5, the edge element corresponding to 4 is 0 in any triangle outside. So it's 0 here. 5 is also 0 here. So all I'm left with is those elements which are around this point. So I just have T1, T2, T3. Okay. So now what I'll do is I'll show you, this was one of the questions in the earlier session which someone asked about how do you actually assemble these equations. Okay, we have done all of this, we've got some long expression for the weak form of Maxwell's equations. Okay, very good. We have got some basis functions over here. Very good. Now let's put it together. So I thought that what I'll do is I'll take a very simple concrete example of just 2 elements. And with 2 elements, I'll show you how you can assemble the matrix. Okay. So this is going to be our geometry. So have a look at this while I erase this. There were also some questions about local node numbers, global node numbers. So these are addressed over here. There is a lot of bookkeeping that everyone has to do when they're designing a FEM code, because each triangle has its local node numbers, edge numbers. But when you look at this little triangle inside the bigger scheme, they are all, you cannot address them by local numbers anymore. So this is an example. So 2 triangles A and B. A has local edge numbers are inside, so 0, 1 and 2. Similarly, B has 0, 1 and 2. And these will be arbitrarily defined according to your mesh generation software. Each one will have some different convention of doing it, which is nothing special about it. And so what we need to do in writing this FEM code is to come up with a global numbering scheme. Again, this is entirely in your hand. There is nothing God given about it. So I have named them arbitrarily 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So the numbers in blue are the global edge numbers. The numbers in circle are the global node numbers. This again you can do as per your choices. Okay. So I'll introduce one shorthand notation over here. So phi of TH. If you remember, we had one term which was inside the area integral, right? There was a double integral over sigma and there was one ugly expression inside it. So let me introduce a shorthand notation for this ugly expression. Okay. Now, when you want to assemble the equations, what will you do? Is you will go edge by edge. Okay, if there are n edges in the mesh, you will get a n by n matrix solution. So let's, for sake of example, take the global edge number 5. Okay, so I'm going to take 5 just as an example, because it has two elements on it. Okay. Now, the field inside any point in A will only depend on 1, 4 and 5. The field inside B will only depend on 2, 3 and 5. Okay. So in my FEM equation, what did I have? I had something like this, right? And some phi and something over here. This was over the entire computational domain. So my first step is this sigma. In our case, what is it? It's just two triangles, A and B. So I can write this as A, B. That's the first step. Okay. Now I'm going to evaluate this guy inside A and inside B. Okay. So inside A, I need to write down the magnetic field. The magnetic field inside A will only depend on 1, 4 and 5. Correct? So, and I'm testing with edge number 5. That means this T over here is my edge number 5. Correct? So, let me write this here. So let me start with here. So the field inside here is going to be U4, U1 and U5 along each of the bases, right? So I will have something like U4 phi of T5A, T4A. Right? So I have my testing function is T5. It is non-zero only over A element over here. So the first term is going to be this. So I'll have a U4 term, a U1 term and a U5 term, right? So the next term will be U5, okay. And if there is some term which is non-zero, let's say, yeah, this step over here, okay. So this is fine. I'm splitting this over A and B, correct? Now what I'm going to do is, when I'm looking at element A, the only non-zero part for, so basically I'm going to expand H like this, Ui, Ti, right? So now when I'm choosing H to be Ui, Ti, which are the elements that are non-zero inside A? T4 and T5 over element A. So that's my T4A, T5A, T1A. And they're all being tested against T5. That's why T5 is common here, here and here. Right? So this very simple example shows you the sparse nature of the FEM matrix. Because the only coupling is going to happen when your testing function, in this case T5, shares an edge with any triangle. So if I had a mesh like this, where one triangle here and one triangle here, there is no coupling between this edge and any of these guys. Right? So this gives you a very powerful solution of a sparse matrix. So you can have a very large number of triangles. It's okay. Even in some of the codes which I've written, I've gone up to 1 million variables. And I'm still able to solve it because the matrix is not dense. If it were dense, I'm finished. But with a sparse matrix, it's fine. I can solve it. There's no problem. Okay. So this was simply over A. Similarly, I can do the same thing over B. Correct? So now in shorthand, I'll just write down the one line of in this large matrix that I'm going to start. Right now, I'm only telling you what is the entry for the fifth element. So what will that line look like now? So you can see I have a 4, 5, 5, 5 and 5, 1. Similarly, 5 will also have a 5, 2 and 5, 3 and 5, 5. Correct? So I will have something like this. So that's it. We are finished with this. So you can see AA51 is telling me how edge 5 and edge 1 are coupled over element A, how edge 5 and 2 are coupled over element, in this case has to be B. 5 and 3 again should be B, 5 and 4 will be again A, and then two self terms will come. 5 will couple to itself over A and over B. So this is your left hand side of the matrix, and what should all of these be multiplied by? So this is U1, U2, U3, U4, U5, right? So this is, visualize this as one row of the matrix. This is being multiplied by the column vector U1, U3, U1 up to U5, okay? And this is going to be equal to a vector B5. Now B5 will be non-zero only if you are, if the edge 5 is on the boundary. If you remember the equation that we had the right hand side was only a contour integral over gamma. So obviously this term will be non-zero only if the edge that we are testing, which is 5, is on the boundary. Okay, so now you proceed like this. So you can see this is very simple to implement in the for loop. You go from 1 to n, and at each edge you see, okay, edge number 1, who all are you connected to? You write down in the correct entries, you write this down. Edge 2, 3, 4, 5 up to n. On the right hand side, if that edge is on the boundary, okay, put a non-zero term. It so happens that most of the terms will be 0 because most of the edges in a mesh are in the interior. There are only few on the boundary. Okay, so this takes care of that. So this gives you an example of a mesh which I have used in a research setting. Okay, here what I was trying to simulate was how a radar wave interacts with a natural soil surface. So this orange thing over here is a soil surface that is rough, because realistic soil, everyone has seen it, you cannot model it as a flat surface. So you have to model it as a stochastic process. So FEM allows you to respect the boundaries of the soil surface, which I have done here, and I am going to propagate the incident wave from here and calculate the far field from here. Okay. So far what I have done is, what I showed you with just two elements, you assume some unknown constant for each of the edges, you will get a n by n matrix, you will solve it, okay. Because it is sparse, you can even do direct factorization, you don't have to go to conjugate gradient or whatever, as long as the problem is not too large, okay, and you solve it. So after you solve it, what do you get? You get all of these numbers, u1 up to un. So what do you know? You know the electric or magnetic field along each of these edges. So if I ask you, after you have done this calculation, what is the field at say some point here? So what do? I look at the edges of this triangle and I use this formula over here, UITI. The only difference is, now I know I have already calculated UI. So I know the field everywhere. Okay. So now this part, this is the part that FEM will tell you. Now in this problem itself, for example, you may ask, but I cannot simulate this for, like, the radar is nowhere in this picture, right? The radar is flying at 900 kilometers. I cannot make a simulation domain so large. So how do I find out the field that the radar will observe, right? So in that case, FEM is not enough if you want to calculate the fields that have propagated far out. So there you have to use some kind of far field approximation based on the surface equivalence principle, right? So I'll just write down one expression for it without proof. Yeah. Now. Correct. They are there. Very good question, very good question. You see, this phi over here has the epsilon r and mu r here, right? So, and this is for element A. So for element A, if you know the material property is epsilon equal to 20 or 30, whatever, you put that over here when you are at element A. When you go to element B, let's say the property has changed. So for each element, it will have its own mu r and epsilon r. It's not assumed constant everywhere, right? Because this phi over here has to be evaluated at all space, correct? Right? So the material property gets taken into account here and here.
But we formulate summation of UITA.
Fine, H is equal to summation of.
UITA.
Right.
But in the formation of UI, UI is what?
UI is a number.
Like each T5 and T4.
Yes. Not just the value of, not exactly the value of phi, but the value of the integral of phi. Okay, this is just a shorthand notation for this ugly thing, which was actually sitting inside the area term, right? So I have to evaluate this. So when I evaluate this, first of all, I break this up into each of the triangles. Each of the triangles has a different epsilon r, different mu r. I specify that, right? So all of that is part of my FEM code, which knows, okay, I have reached element XYZ, its epsilon is so much, right? So now this is a very general formulation. I have not made any approximations. I started with Maxwell's equations as it is, and I got this. So this is extremely powerful formulation. There is no approximation. There are no spurious solutions because it's not a node-based solution. Okay, so the final step, as I was telling you, is I have simulated and I've got the fields everywhere. Now, how do I find out what is the field somewhere else, right? So that is what I'll just quickly show you. Those of you who are familiar with integral equations will find this comfortable. It again looks a little nasty, but let that not deter us. Okay, so I'm writing the expression for the far field electric field, the electric field in the far field. So yesterday Professor Shivgaonkar talked about Bessel functions and so on, right? Here is your Bessel function, right? So this is the first term, this is your Bessel function in 2 dimensions. In 2 dimensions it depends on square root r. In 3 dimensions it depends as 1 by r. And in 1D of course there is no such thing, it's just constant. And here is the monstrosity. So what I do is, I have calculated the electromagnetic fields everywhere. Now I assume some hypothetical contour like this. Okay, I am calling it C. And what I'll do is that at each point on this C, I will calculate an equivalent electric current and an equivalent magnetic current. Okay, I can do that, and the net result is something like this. So I know this looks horrible, right? But what we have over here is M over here. What is M? M is the equivalent magnetic current. It's given by N cross C. We all studied this when we looked at boundary conditions. And what is J? I think there's a minus sign here, sorry. Right. So now we are done. What I do is, I know the magnetic fields and electric fields everywhere inside this. I choose a convenient loop on which I will evaluate this. So this is, in other words, Huygens principle, which we studied in school. Expressed in the mathematical form. And I know M, I know J, everything else is known over here. So I can simulate what the radar sees. So because now I know what is the electric field far away from here. Right? So I'm done. So if you actually want to know what is the exact expression for the radar cross section, you can write it here itself. So sigma is what the radar will see. So this is what the radar will see. So E squared normalized with the incident field, and there's a R here. This R is very fortunate because we should not get an answer that depends on how far the radar is, right? So this R cancels off the root R squared from this expression over here. So this is exactly what the radar will observe. Okay. So now this entire tutorial is in a much more elaborate form. It's on my website, so if you want, you can just download it. I'll flash the link. Okay. And read it in more detail. References are also there. So I had built this code, I have written this code myself from scratch. And sometime in the near future, I will also make it available on the website. So yeah, any questions?
Just want to make one comment about that big element which you talked about.
Right.
The other type of element.
Right.
That because here you have a normal component of the tangential field is continuous, normal is not
exactly.
continuous. The other way around is also used in magnetics also.
I see. Because flux you want to conserve.
When you are doing the measure of moments,
I see.
the surface fields, because the surface is actually you are having a surface current.
Right.
So current satisfies the other. You want a normal component to be continuous and tangential to be discontinuous.
I see.
So
Okay.
where would you use it? That is called a Raw-Wilton
RWG basis.
RW. That is actually the same one.
Right. Okay, there you have a better answer. So once you get Fourier theory tells you what? Once you know the solution for one sinusoidal function, I can superpose the solution of any number of things. So let's say I have a time signal, I decompose it into several frequencies, and I can add here. The only thing that is coming here is the k naught squared. So where is frequency going in? In our entire formulation, where did frequency go in? Went into two places. First place is here. The k naught is omega c naught. Omega went in there. The second thing is slightly hidden. Can you tell me where it is? Where is frequency hidden here? Frequency is hidden in epsilon r and mu r, because epsilon r and mu r are material properties which are in general frequency dependent. So you may have to change your epsilon r and mu r depending on what frequency you are working at. Other than that is general. But if you are interested in time domain, I will not recommend FEM. Because to do FEM in time domain is a lot more work. It's like we got one big matrix which we solved at a single frequency. But if you're interested in time domain, it is like trying to evolve a matrix in time. So you're better off doing finite difference time domain.
Where the frequency plays a role, once displacement current comes, what are the parameters against which we should measure? At what point displacement current gives?
Displacement current came in the very first step.
Yeah, it came in the very first.
Right. When I replaced dd by dt, I replaced it by j omega, it came in there.
I understand that.
Right.
But do we have a parameter against epsilon and relation to mu?
Mu.
At what point we should start taking displacement current?
Displacement current is in the picture throughout the formulation. We never ignore it. This is high frequency analysis. We don't, yeah. I mean, this is a general analysis. I will not say this is a high frequency analysis. Because I have not ignored anything, this is a general analysis.
You don't take displacement current, you won't get away with it.
Yeah, exactly. Then you will get no wave propagation on this mesh, right? So one more thing that I did not mention here is that there are two ways of formulating the problem. You must have heard total field and scattered field, right? So again, those details are on the tutorial over here. You can formulate the problem in either way. There are advantages and disadvantages to both methods. I won't go into it over here. Loss is considered. Make your mu r and epsilon r to be complex. If you want a lossy material, make mu r to have an imaginary component. It's fully general. There's no thing here. If you know beforehand that some part of the region has a very high epsilon, then you need to make your discretization finer, right? So you can see that next to the edge, you can make these to be finer. So in general, to ensure numerical convergence, the edge length should be on the order of lambda by 15 to lambda by 20. Then you get numerical convergence.
For high frequency ferrites, you put the complex parameter.
So I have not done it for ferrites, but yeah, it does not matter. Whatever you have, you just plug it in. There is no limitation on that. None whatsoever.
And once you take that complex mu r and epsilon r, then there will be strong dependency of frequency.
Yeah.
Also take anisotropic.
Yes, you can take anisotropic materials as well. Here what I did, I put this epsilon r in the denominator. Instead, before I took it in the denominator, you could write out the component wise for x, for y, for z, and then you'll, instead of one equation, you'll get 3 equations. That's all. Okay, thank you.
So Professor Kankhoze has explained very lucidly very difficult subject, and if you understand the physics behind each step, what he has written, then this becomes a very strong or powerful tool to solve various problems. So let's clap.
Thank you
For him again.